Imagine you are in Paris. The year is 1803, but this is not the Paris of romance and art that you know. This is a city holding its breath, the heart of a nation balanced on a knife's edge. And in the center of it all, inside the opulent Tuileries Palace, a decision is being forged in steam and fury, a decision that will shape a continent half a world away. You are witnessing a conversation few have ever heard. The door to the first consul's private bath chamber bursts open. Through the swirling vapor, a figure emerges, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. This is Joseph Bonaparte, elder brother to the most powerful man in France. And that man, Napoleon Bonaparte, is submerged to his neck in a steaming, perfumed bath. He barely glances at his furious sibling, his focus on a report floating on a wooden tray before him. You cannot be serious, Joseph's voice trembles, but it cuts through the humid air. To sell it, all of it, Napoleon lets out a soft sigh, a puff of condensation in the air. It is a trifle, Joseph. A vast, empty wilderness that costs us more than it is worth. A trifle, Joseph steps closer, his boots clicking on the wet marble. It is an empire that Spain returned to us by treaty. An empire that gives France a foothold in the New World, a check against the English. And you would sell it for what? A pittance to fund another one of your wars. Napoleon finally looks up. His eyes, usually burning with restless energy, are weary but hard as flint. The money is a means to an end. The war with England is not one war among many, Joseph. It is the war. And Louisiana, undefended, will be the first thing their navy swallows. It is better to have the cash in our hands than a feather in their cap. This is not your decision to make alone, Joseph counters, his voice rising. The Constitution requires the consent of the chambers. This is illegal. A dangerous smile plays on Napoleon's lips. He sinks deeper into the water, only his eyes and nose visible above the surface. The Constitution, brother, he says, his voice a low, menacing whisper, is what I say it is. I will dispose of Louisiana without anyone's consent. Do you understand me? Joseph stares, speechless. He sees not a brother but a monarch in the making, a man unbound by law or counsel. And in that moment, the fate of a vast, uncharted land named Louisiana, and with it, the future of the United States of America, hangs precariously in the steam-filled air of this bathroom. Now let us leave the steam and marble of Paris behind and cross the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. Our destination is a new capital city, little more than a muddy, sprawling construction site, a place of ambitious blueprints and harsh reality. Washington, D.C., and inside the still unfinished president's house, another man is staring at a piece of paper. But his is not a report of military strategy. It is a letter, and it carries the scent of tar, sweat, and rebellion. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, stands not as a triumphant philosopher, but as a cornered politician. The candlelight flickers across his tall, lean frame. He reads the words from the governor of Kentucky for the third time, the ink barely dry. The men of the West are not idle spectators, the letter warns. They are hardy and they are armed. If this government cannot secure for them the river that is their lifeblood, they will be forced to secure it for themselves. A threat, thinly veiled. It was a nightmare Jefferson had prayed to avoid. When Spain controlled the great port of New Orleans, it was a manageable problem. Spain was a fading power, peaceable in its inclinations. But now behind Spain stood France. And behind France stood the whirlwind of a man he had just seen in Paris. His Secretary of State, James Madison, a small, quiet man whose intellect was a fortress, looked up from a map of the continent. "The Federalists are calling for war," Madison said, his voice grave. "They demand we send 50,000 men to seize New Orleans immediately." Jefferson ran a hand through his reddish hair. "The Federalists would rush us into a war we cannot win, a standing army, a national debt, everything we fought against." He gestures to the letter. "But this is the fire at our back, secession. The Union, James, not yet 30 years old, could be torn apart before it has even learned to walk." His vision, his great empire of liberty, a republic of self-sufficient, virtuous farmers spreading peacefully across the continent, was choking. Its lungs, the great Mississippi River, were being squeezed shut. In a smoky tavern further west, another conversation is taking place. General James Wilkinson, the ranking officer of the U.S. Army, a man whose ambition is matched only by his duplicity, leans over a table with a handful of disgruntled landowners and militia captains. "Gentlemen, you have seen the truth," Wilkinson says, his voice a conspiratorial murmur. "The coastal elites in Washington do not understand us. They see us as crude frontiersmen. They will sacrifice our livelihoods to avoid offending their French philosophers. But the river belongs to us. And if the Union will not secure it, then perhaps it is the Union that is the obstacle." He lets the treasonous thought hang in the air. The men around him exchange uneasy glances. This is more than just frustration. This is the seed of rebellion. To understand what happens next, you need to understand the scale of Napoleon's ambition. It was not small. It was not limited to Europe. He saw the globe as his chessboard, and North America was a critical square. For him, Louisiana was not just land. It was the foundation of a new French empire, a self-sustaining economic powerhouse designed to challenge Great Britain. Imagine it. The engine of this empire was the jewel of the Caribbean, the colony of Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti. In 1803, this single island produced 40% of the world's sugar, a source of immense wealth. And the vast territory of Louisiana. It was meant to be the empire's granary, a breadbasket providing all the food, timber, and supplies the sugar islands would ever need. No longer would they have to rely on illegal trade with the Americans. It was a brilliant, closed loop of commerce and power. It was a vision worthy of a Caesar. But visions, especially those imposed by force, have a way of colliding with reality. And the reality of Saint-Domingue was not one of compliant workers, but of proud former slaves who had tasted freedom and would die before giving it back. Led by the brilliant and ruthless Jean-Jacques Dessalines, they waged a brutal guerrilla war against the French troops sent to re-enslave them. And they had an ally far more deadly than any European army, the yellow fever, the mosquito. In the fever-ridden swamps of Haiti, Napoleon's grand army, the victors of Europe, died in droves. Not in glorious battle, but in delirious, agonizing sickness. His own brother-in-law, General Leclerc, sent to command the expedition, was shipped back to France in a lead-lined coffin. The reports that reached Napoleon were not of glory and conquest, but of disaster, of thousands upon thousands of his best soldiers lost. The cost was catastrophic. The dream was dead. Suddenly, the granary had no engine to feed. The heart of his New World empire had been cut out by revolution and disease. And so, Louisiana, the keystone of his great ambition, became a strategic liability. An expensive, undefended territory that the British Navy could seize the moment war inevitably broke out again. This is why a man who only took, a man who only conquered, was suddenly willing to sell. He wasn't selling an empire. He was cutting his losses. He was selling a ghost. And so we return to that steam-filled room in the Tuileries. We now understand the pieces on the board. We know Jefferson's desperation. We know Napoleon's disillusionment. A deal seems inevitable, a simple matter of business. But history is rarely simple. It is not a clean equation of logic and need. It is a messy human affair, driven by pride, passion, and ego. We are moments after Joseph has stormed out of the bath chamber. Napoleon, now robed in silk, stands before a grand mirror, but he does not see his own reflection. He sees a map of the world in his mind. The pragmatic part of him, the part that won battles, knows that selling Louisiana is the correct, logical move. It is a poisoned asset, but the voices of his inner circle echo in his ears. The furious shouts of his brothers, Joseph and Lucien. "An unconstitutional act," Lucien had screamed, his face pale with fury. He had been the one to negotiate the treaty to get Louisiana back from Spain. For him, this was a personal betrayal. The territory of the Republic is not yours to sell like a sack of potatoes at market. The chambers will never approve it. Then came the subtle, more dangerous words, whispered by his serpentine foreign minister, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. He had approached him later in the quiet of the study. "First Consul," Talleyrand had said, his face a mask of polite concern, "forgive my impertinence, but the Americans are merchants. They see a bargain. To sell an empire for what amounts to 3 cents an acre, the courts of Europe will not see this as a shrewd strategic move. They will see it as a fire sale. They will say the great Napoleon lost his nerve." Talleyrand knew his master. He knew Napoleon could withstand any political argument, any military threat. But the one thing he could not bear was ridicule, the thought of being seen as weak, as a fool on the world stage. Law, honor, pride. The pragmatic need for $15 million was beginning to feel trivial against the weight of these words. The logical decision, the one born from the hard realities of Haiti, was now at war with his own image of himself. He turns from the mirror, his jaw set. He calls for his finance minister, Barbé Marbois, the man tasked with making the deal. The course of history is about to be set by one man's pride. This is the moment, the point of divergence. Every story of alternate history has one, a single instant when the river of time forks, creating a new, unseen reality. For the United States of America, that moment is not on a battlefield, nor in a crowded convention hall. It is here, in this room. Now, François Barbé Marbois, the Minister of Finance, enters Napoleon's study. He is a practical man, a man of numbers and contracts. In his hands, he holds the final proposal from the American envoys. He believes his task is simple: to get the first consul's final blessing on the price, $15 million, and conclude the greatest real estate deal in history. He places the documents on the polished mahogany desk. "First Consul," he begins, "the Americans are eager. I believe we can settle on 80 million francs, a remarkable sum for a territory we cannot even defend." Napoleon does not look at the papers. His eyes are fixed on a point somewhere beyond the walls of the palace. The internal war between pragmatism and pride is over. A victor has been chosen. He raises a hand, stopping Barbé Marbois mid-sentence. "The discussions are finished," Napoleon says, his voice devoid of all emotion. It is the voice of a man issuing a final, irrevocable order. Barbé Marbois blinks. "Yes, First Consul. So I should inform them we accept the price." "No," Napoleon interrupts. He pushes the documents back across the desk. It is a small gesture, but it feels as final as a slamming iron door. "You will inform the Americans that the territory of Louisiana is not for sale. The honor of France is not for sale." The finance minister is stunned into silence. This is a complete reversal. He stammers, "But the funds for the army, the strategic situation." "The strategic situation," Napoleon states, rising from his chair, "is that Louisiana is French, and French it shall remain. You may offer them a new treaty, a lease perhaps for the port of New Orleans, at a price that reflects the generosity of France for allowing their ships to dock in our harbor. That is all." Barbé Marbois can only stare. He understands. The deal is dead. The $15 million, the solution to so many of France's problems, has vanished. All for a word: honor. And with that single word, the future of North America is rewritten. The United States will not double in size. Its westward destiny is not manifest. It is canceled. A new history, a history of constraint, of conflict, and of a dream denied, has just begun. The fastest message across the Atlantic in 1803 travels at the speed of wind and sail. For weeks, Washington has been a city of anxious silence, waiting. Every arriving ship is met with the same desperate question: is there word from Paris? Finally, the dispatch arrives. It is not the thick packet of a treaty, but a single, thin letter. In the president's house, Thomas Jefferson breaks the seal with trembling fingers. His Secretary of State, James Madison, watches, his own face taut with anxiety. As Jefferson reads the words penned by his envoy, James Monroe, the color drains from his face. The letter slips from his grasp and flutters to the floor. There is no need for Madison to read it. He can see the answer in his friend's eyes. Failure, absolute and complete. Napoleon would not sell. That evening the cabinet room is a battlefield of words. The air is thick with fear and accusation. "I warned of this," bellows the Secretary of War. "We should have sent the army when we had the chance. We have shown weakness and Napoleon has shown us contempt." Albert Gallatin, the shrewd Secretary of the Treasury, shakes his head. "An army we do not have, and a war we cannot afford. Your show of force would have bankrupted us before the first shot was fired." A senior Republican congressman, a staunch ally of Jefferson, slams his hand on the table. "This is what comes of trusting European despots. We should have stood by our friends in France, not approached them like groveling merchants. You have embarrassed the Republic, Mr. President." At that same moment, another dispatch is placed on Jefferson's desk. It is from a military outpost on the Ohio River. It speaks of seditious gatherings. It names a senior officer as a person of interest, General James Wilkinson. Jefferson, who had sat in silence through the storm of accusations, finally rises. The arguments cease. He looks less like a president and more like a man besieged from all sides, his own house crumbling around him. "He will not yield," Jefferson says, his voice a dry rasp. "France intends to create a new empire on our western border. The port of New Orleans will be its gate, and Napoleon will hold the key." The Secretary of War stands. "Then we must take it by force. The Federalists are right. It is time for war." "War," Jefferson scoffs, a spark of his old fire returning. "A war against the greatest general of the age. We would be crushed, and even as we fought them, we would be fighting ourselves. There are whispers of treason in the West, whispers of a new confederacy, separate from our own. We are trapped between a foreign tyrant and a domestic rebellion." The room falls silent again. The true gravity of their predicament settles upon them. To do nothing means the Western states, led by men like Wilkinson, will break away, tearing the Union apart. To declare war means national suicide. Jefferson walks to the great map of North America, the one Madison had been studying just weeks before. He places a hand over the vast, empty space labeled Louisiana. For a moment, it had represented a boundless future. Now it is a wall, a cage. He turns back to his cabinet, his face set like a death mask. He is about to betray himself. He is about to sacrifice his most sacred principles on the altar of necessity. "Gentlemen," he says, and every man in the room leans forward. "There is only one path left to us. It is a path I have dreaded, a path that goes against the very spirit of our revolution." He takes a deep breath. "To build our perfect union, I have come to realize I must make a pact with the devil I know." He pauses, the weight of the words pressing down on him. "Prepare a delegation to London. Inform the British ambassador that the President of the United States wishes to discuss an alliance. We must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation." It is done. The first, and perhaps most profound, butterfly effect of Napoleon's decision has taken flight. To save his empire of liberty from one empire, Jefferson has just thrown it into the arms of another. The tragic irony was complete. An alliance born of desperation is a fragile thing. The secret pact with Great Britain was, for Jefferson, a necessary evil. But in politics, no secret stays secret for long, and its revelation sent a shockwave through the American political landscape. The effect was immediate and profound. The Federalist Party, which had been on the verge of political extinction, was suddenly, miraculously resurrected. In a Boston hall, Fisher Ames, a prominent Federalist orator known for his golden tongue and pessimistic view of democracy, addresses a cheering crowd. "For years, we have been called monarchists and aristocrats, simply for speaking the truth. We warned that Mr. Jefferson's romantic attachment to French radicals would lead to ruin. We argued for a strong government, a navy, and a realistic understanding with Great Britain. And what has happened? Reality has proven us right. While Mr. Jefferson was dreaming of his agrarian utopia, the wolf came to the door. And now, to save his own skin, the president runs to the very nation he scorned, to the British Navy he once called a tyranny. Pragmatism has prevailed, and the Federalists have been vindicated. Jefferson's Democratic Republicans were thrown into disarray. Their traditional pro-French stance was now a source of national embarrassment. They had championed a revolution inspired by France, only to be betrayed by its leader. The alliance with Britain caused a deep rift within the party, with many old guard Republicans viewing Jefferson's move as a betrayal of their core principles. The president was more isolated than ever, forced to rely on the tacit support of his political enemies to keep the nation afloat. In the months that followed Jefferson's fateful decision, Washington became a city of whispers and shadows. The British ambassador, a man named Anthony Merry who was known for his haughty demeanor, became a frequent, discreet visitor to the president's house. The negotiations for the alliance were fraught with peril. His Majesty's government is, of course, sympathetic to the American position, Merry said during one tense meeting, his tone anything but sympathetic. The ambitions of Bonaparte threaten us all. However, the protection of the Royal Navy is not without cost. James Madison, sitting beside Jefferson, countered coolly. We are offering a military alliance, Mr. Ambassador. Our men will fight alongside yours to contain France in this hemisphere. That is a considerable contribution. Merry allowed himself a thin smile. Your militias, yes, a spirited if rustic force. But a few thousand frontiersmen are not the Royal Navy. His Majesty requires certain assurances, favorable trade terms in perpetuity, and a formal renunciation of any American claims to the Oregon Territory. We cannot be expected to protect your western flank if you intend to challenge us on the Pacific. Jefferson felt a chill run down his spine. It was exactly as he had feared. The British were not offering a partnership. They were offering a leash. To secure the Mississippi, he would have to sacrifice the dream of the Pacific. It was a devil's bargain, and the devil was driving a hard price. But with reports of Wilkinson's treasonous plotting growing more alarming by the day, Jefferson knew he had no choice. He had to project strength, even if it was borrowed. With a heavy heart, he agreed to the terms. The ink was barely dry on the treaty when the first British supply ships began arriving in Baltimore and Boston, their hulls filled not with trade goods, but with rifles, cannons, and kegs of gunpowder for the American militias gathering in the West. The news of the alliance and the sight of British equipment sent a wave of patriotic fervor and deep resentment through the frontier. In Kentucky, Eli, along with hundreds of other young men, answered the call to muster. His fiancée Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as he was issued a brand new British rifle. "It feels wrong," she whispered to him that night. "My father fought the redcoats. Now you carry their gun." "I'm not fighting for them," Eli said, his jaw tight as he cleaned the weapon. "I'm fighting for this farm, for our future. If I have to use a British rifle to keep a French boot off our necks, then so be it. When this is over, we'll have the river back. That's all that matters." But the war he was marching toward was far more complex than he knew. The Louisiana War began not with a grand declaration, but with a series of bloody, confused skirmishes in the dense forests and swamps along the Mississippi. Eli found himself in the heart of it. His unit was part of an attempt to capture a small French fort that controlled a key river junction. The battle was a disaster. Their maps were wrong. The French were better entrenched than expected. And their commander, a man loyal to Wilkinson, seemed to make every possible mistake. They were ordered to advance through a swampy marsh into a clear field of fire. The French cannons erupted with a roar of smoke and flame. Men screamed and fell around Eli. He fired his British rifle until the barrel was hot to the touch, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling his lungs. He saw his neighbor from the next farm, a boy he'd known his whole life, torn apart by a cannonball. The organized advance became a panicked retreat. Eli and a few survivors scrambled back through the mud and cypress trees. That night, hiding in the dark woods, they heard voices. A French patrol. But one of the voices was speaking English with an American accent. Eli crept closer. In the faint moonlight, he saw a man he recognized, one of Wilkinson's aides, handing a small pouch to a French officer. "The general sends his regards," the aide said. "He trusts this information will be useful. He suggests you fortify the northern approach. The federal troops are planning a feint to the south." The French officer nodded, handing a small, heavy bag in return. "Governor Lawset appreciates the general's foresight. Tell him his next message will be received with great interest." Eli's blood ran cold. It was true. The whispers were true. The battle had not been a mistake. It had been a betrayal. Their own commanding general was selling them out to the enemy. He was no longer just a farmer fighting for a river. He was a witness to treason, holding a secret that could either save the country or get him killed. The news of General Wilkinson's treason threw the American war effort into chaos. While Jefferson's loyalist officers moved to contain the rogue general, the western frontier teetered on the brink of a civil war within a foreign war. For Eli, the journey to deliver the proof was a desperate race against time. He traveled by night, avoiding patrols from both the French and Wilkinson's men, who now hunted him as a deserter and a spy. He was driven by the horrifying knowledge that the greatest threat to his home was not a foreign soldier, but the celebrated American hero leading his own army. He finally reached the encampment of a Federalist-appointed commander, a man known to be a bitter rival of Wilkinson. Exhausted and feverish, Eli presented the captured French pouch and recounted the conversation he had overheard. The commander, a grim veteran of the Revolution, listened in stony silence. The evidence was undeniable. The conspiracy was real. With Wilkinson's plot exposed, the Western rebellion fractured and collapsed. The general himself, cornered and betrayed by his own subordinates, fled into Spanish territory, forever branded a traitor. The immediate threat of the Union's collapse was averted, but the scars of the betrayal ran deep. The West had lost its innocence. On the main front, the Louisiana War ground to a bloody stalemate. The American militias, though supplied by Britain, could not conquer the vast territory. The French, cut off by the Royal Navy, could not hope for victory. It was a war of attrition that served only to drain the resources of both fledgling nations. Ultimately, the war was ended not by a decisive battle, but by a treaty signed in London, with the British ambassador acting as the primary mediator. The fate of the continent was decided in Europe, just as Jefferson had feared. Wars end, treaties are signed, and maps are redrawn. Let us look at the map that resulted. The map we lost. First, the United States. Its western border is a hard, permanent boundary, the Mississippi River. The nation is confined, a coastal republic forever looking eastward across the Atlantic, its back turned to a continent it can never possess. And what of Louisiana itself? In New Orleans, 1825, the air is thick with the smell of chicory and intrigue. The city is a vibrant mosaic of resentful French Creoles, ambitious Americans, and powerful British merchants. In a cafe on the Rue Royale, Antoine de Marigny, a wealthy Creole planter whose fortunes were wrecked by the British blockade, glares at a table across the room. There sits Silas Reed, the merchant from Boston. The war that ruined Marigny made Silas rich. His connections to the British supply chain have made him one of the most powerful men in the city. He represents the new order. Later, in a sweltering notary's office, these two men, the old Creole aristocrat and the new American capitalist, sit across from each other. Marigny, to save his ancestral plantation from bankruptcy, is being forced to sign a partnership agreement with Silas. "You must understand, monsieur," Silas says, not unkindly, "the age of sugar is over. The future of this city, of this nation, is cotton, and the mills in Manchester, my mills, pay the best prices." Marigny dips his pen in the ink. His hand trembles slightly. My family has ruled this land for 100 years. We were French. And now, monsieur, Silas replies, we are survivors. The new North America is a continent of rivals. The frontier, the defining myth of American identity, is closed. The pressure that would have gone west now flows back east into the crowded cities. New York and Philadelphia swell, their slums growing, their factories churning out goods for a maritime empire, not a continental one. The social tensions of industrial Europe arrive a generation early. We have seen a new map of North America, but the most profound change is not one of geography. It is one of internal chemistry. Let us travel forward in time to the year 1861. In our history, this is the year the cannons fired on Fort Sumter, the year the nation tore itself apart, the beginning of the Civil War. But in this timeline, the year 1861 is quiet. Tense, yes. Divided, certainly. But there is no war. In the U.S. Senate chamber, a Southern senator is railing against a new tariff. This is an act of economic tyranny by the industrial North, an attempt to strangle our agrarian way of life. We will not stand for it. We will nullify this unjust law. A Northern senator, a stern-faced abolitionist, rises to respond. The senator from South Carolina speaks of tyranny, while his own state profits from the tyranny of human bondage. The tariff will stand, but his threats of nullification are as empty as they have ever been. His state has nowhere to go. And that is the key. In our world, every debate was amplified by the explosive question of the West. Would the new territories be free or slave? It was this zero-sum game for the nation's future that pushed it past the breaking point. But in this America, there is no West to fight over. The political powder keg is missing. The conflict smolders, but it lacks the fuel to engulf the nation in flames. The Civil War, as we know it, never happens. The United States is not forged in that crucible of fire. It remains a house divided, but one that does not fall. It simply festers. So, we arrive at the end of our journey. A world without the America we know. A world born from a moment of pride in a Parisian bathroom. What does the 20th century look like in this reality? Glimpses flicker past. The Great War of 1914 is a grinding, decade-long war of empires. There is no American century. The Second World War is a different, more terrible beast, fought between the empires of Britain, Germany, and Russia, without the immense industrial might of a continental United States to tip the scales. Our final scene takes us to a quiet university study in this alternate present day. An elderly historian stands before a large, framed map of North America. The map is familiar, yet deeply strange. He called it the Empire of Liberty, the historian says to a young student beside him, his voice a soft, melancholic whisper. The most beautiful phrase ever conceived for a nation. A land of free farmers stretching across a continent beholden to no one. He taps the glass over the territory marked Louisiana Française. Jefferson dreamt of an empire of liberty, but what his choice ultimately bought us was a fragile liberty, lived in the shadow of empires. The student looks puzzled. His choice, but I thought he failed. I thought Napoleon refused to sell. The old historian smiles, a sad, knowing smile that holds the weight of all the history we have just witnessed. Exactly, he says. He wanted an empire of liberty, and in the end, that noble dream purchased for us only a gilded cage. He turns back to the map, to the world that is, and the ghost of the world that could have been. In Kentucky, an ancient Eli sits on his porch, watching the river flow by. His grandson sits at his feet. "Grandpa," the boy asks, "why didn't we ever cross the river? Why didn't we settle the plains like the songs say?" Eli looks at the far shore, a land that has been foreign his entire life. He puts a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Because, son," he says, his voice heavy with a lifetime of constrained horizons, "some promises get broken, and some dreams, they just find a place to die. Our dream died right here on this side of the river.